Good morning all. Welcome back to our course on the C programming language. In today's session, I am going to start a new concept called as the unions. And in today's session, I am going to concentrate only on the introductory parts related to the unions. So I have kept it as part 1 of the unions in C. The agenda for today's session will be like this. So I will start with what actually these unions are, and then we'll see the defining part of union, how we can define the union, and then we'll see how to declare the union variables. These are the 3 introductory concepts that I would like to discuss under today's session. So let us see what these unions are. If you go to the actual definition of the unions, we can say that these unions are user defined data types. The meaning of user defined data types, we know very well that these data types are defined by the user and they will be utilized by the user, right? So like the fundamental data types, what we have are the int, char, float, double, etc. Those are defined by the initial program developers or the C programming language developers, and they will be utilized by the programmers. But we know that the C provides some facility to define a data type of our choice. That is, they come under the category of user defined data types. So in the previous sessions, we have seen how we can define or how we can declare the structure variables. So under these user defined data types, we have 3 examples that we can give under this user defined data types, that is the structures, then we have the unions, and then we have the enumerations. We have completed the entire course or the entire concept of the structures, and now we are going to start these unions. So when you come across this union, you can say that this union is a user defined data type. So the user has 2 things, or the programmer has 2 things or 2 steps he has to follow to deal with these unions. The first one is he has to define the union, where he will be specifying what are the members of the union, and then he has to declare, the programmer has to declare the variables of the unions. So at the time of declaring the variables only, we know that the memory will be allocated for the unions, or any concept you take in C. The compiler is responsible for allocating the static memory allocation, and it will allocate the memory only at the time of declaration. So when you declare the variables, then only the memory will be allocated. So the first step is the user has to define the unions, and the second step is he has to declare the variables. So this is all about a brief overview of this, what these unions are. But while coming to the actual definition part of the unions, if somebody asks you how to define a union, you can specify that a union is a special data type, or you can also say that it is a user defined data type where the allocation and the storage of different data types is possible. So it is a combination of wide variety of data types. Is a collection or a combination, you can say is a collection of different data types. And remember that all these different data types, what we put under a single common name, they will share a common memory. So this is the only difference between the structures and the unions. They share a common memory. This is very important point. So we'll also discuss the differences between the structures and unions in a separate session, but right now you remember that Unions are a user defined data types, which is nothing but a collection of different data types, and they are going to share the same memory location. Right. So in simple form, you can simply say that a union is a user defined data type, which is a collection of different data types. That's it. And coming to the second part of our discussion, that is how we can define a union. As we know that the user defined data type should be implemented in two steps. The first step is to define the union, and we know what this defining a union means. So you are going to create a union which consists of different data members of your choice, and you are going to give a common name to that. That is called as defining a union. So the syntax for defining a union is almost similar to that of structures, except a single change in the keyword. For defining structures, we will use the keyword called struct. But for defining the unions, we will use a keyword called as union. And after this union, you can give a tag name for this union, which is an optional thing, and then you can define any number of members, member 1, member 2, and like that you can define some n members inside that particular union. And once you specify all the members inside this curly braces, you always make sure that you end the definition of the union with a semicolon. So this is the common syntax which is used in the unions. It starts with the union keyword, and then we have the tag name, which is an optional thing. That is the reason why I have kept it in this angular brackets. Optional in the sense you may specify or you may not specify, nothing wrong in it. And this entire curly braces is called as the union block, where you can define various members, n members. And remember that these n members can be of different data types. For example, member 1 can be an integer data type, or member 2 can be a float, member 3 can be a char, member 4 can be a string which is defined as character array. Like that you can have any number of or any type of data type can be a member of the union. And coming to the example part of this definition, so I want to define a union called student, and let the attributes of this student union be the registration number, which is the first member. So I am giving the registration number as an integer. Similarly, he can have gender, which is of character. Why? Because we can specify the same gender as male or female. We can represent it with a single letter, a single alphabet, M for male and F for female. And then let me give the float data type CGPA 9.8 or 9.5, 8.76, like that we can give it in the float value. So this is let me end it up. This is how I defined a union. See here, the first part is the keyword which is used to specify or which is used to define the union. The second part is the tag name, and then I have defined 3 members inside this union student, and I have ended it with a semicolon. The first member is of integer data type, second member is of character data type, and the third member CGPA is of floating point data type. This is how we need to define a union. And remember one important point, that when we define a union, the memory will not be allocated. You are just telling the compiler, or you are just giving some information to the compiler, that I need all these three members inside my union student. So you are defining a data type, and under that data type you are defining or specifying these three members. So this is all about the defining a union. Now let us go with the third part of our today's session, that is how we can declare the union variables. So the third part is declare the union variables. Similar to that of the declaration of variables for a structure, here in union also we have two types of declaring the structure variables. One is at the time of defining the structure union. So at the part where you are defining the union, you can simply give the, or you can simply declare the structure union variables before the semicolon. That example we will see. And the second type of declaring the union variables is at any point in the program. Let us see the first part with one example. So at the time of defining the union, you can declare any number of union variables. Let us continue with the same example what we have taken in the earlier discussion, that I want to declare a union called student, and within this union I have three members, that is int registration number, and then I have char gender, and then I have another data type which is called as float, and this is the third member is the CGPA, which is a float data type. And before ending this defining of the union at this with the semicolon, before this semicolon I just give one union variable like this, S1. So S1 is a variable of type union student. So the new data type what I have defined here is the union student, and S1 belongs to this data type which is union student. And there is no need that you always specify only one member or one variable of the union here. You can give a list of variables. For example, I want to define four different union variables, S1, S2, S3 and S4. I can give a list separated by commas like this, S1 comma S2 comma S3 comma S4. Here at the time of defining itself, you are declaring four different union variables, and memory will be allocated for these four different union variables in separate locations. We will see whether all these members of the union will be having separate memory location or they will be using the same memory location in the next coming sessions. But while introducing this union concept, I told that it is a collection of elements of different data types that share a common location. So we'll see all these concepts in the next coming sessions. But this is the first type where I have defined or declared the variables of the union at the time of defining the structure itself. And the second part is at any point in the program. So first you have to define the structure union like this. Let me write it down. Char gender float CGPA. So after you write all the members of the union, you put a semicolon, and this is end of our definition, right? And you can create the variables, or you can declare the variables of the union anywhere in the program by just giving the data type. As we told that the new data type that we have created is the union student. So you give the union or the data type which is called the union student type, and you can specify a variable like this, S1. So S1 belongs to union student data type. So S1 is a variable of type union student, and you can specify more number of variables by giving a list of variables like this. So S1, S2, S3 and S4 are 4 different union variables that have been declared for this new data type which is union student. So these are the two different ways where we can declare the union variables. So that's all for today's session. Let us have a quick recap of what we have discussed in today's session. So we have started our discussion of union with what this actually union is. Union is a user defined data type, so we need to follow 2 different steps. One is you define the union with your required number of with your required attributes as members of the union, and then you declare the variables of the union as the second step. So while looking at the definition of the union, it is a special data type which is a collection of different data types, and all those different data types, they are going to share a common memory location. The second part what we have discussed is defining a union. I have given the syntax which starts with the union keyword, and then we have the tag name which is an optional thing, and then we enclose all the members of the union in the curly braces, and we end the union definition with a semicolon. Very important point. And we have given an example of union student which consists of 3 different members. One is the registration number, and second one is the gender, and third one is the CGPA, which are of int, char and float data types respectively. And after this we have moved our discussion to the declaration part of the union, where we can do it in 2 ways. The first one is when you define the union, you can declare the union variables, and similarly at the second one is at any point in the program. We have given some examples of how we can do this declaring the union variables in 2 different ways. That's all for today's session. Thank you one and all for joining the session.